Have you ever wondered what happens when the most powerful man in a closed community, a man with no HR department, no board of directors, and no external oversight of any kind, betrays the very people who place their complete and unconditional trust in him? What a bishop is. An Amish bishop is not appointed by a denomination, selected by a committee, or elected by a congregation. He is chosen by lot, a process the community understands as the direct hand of God selecting the man he wants. From the moment the lot falls on him, a bishop carries an authority that is unlike any other position in Amish life. He is spiritually accountable to God and practically accountable to the community he serves. He is the highest human authority most Amish people will ever know personally. The power he holds. A bishop in an Amish district touches every significant moment of every family's life. He officiates marriages and must approve them. He leads the twice-yearly Ordnung Review, at which every adult member of the church must affirm their peace with God before communion can be taken. He administers church discipline, deciding who is placed under the ban, who is restored, and under what conditions. He is consulted on financial decisions, farming disputes, family conflicts, and questions of faith. He visits homes, sits at kitchen tables, and is received into every household in his district with a level of trust that most people in the modern world extend to almost no one. His word in most districts is final. There is no appeals process above him inside the community. There is no HR department, no board of elders who can overrule him, no formal mechanism by which a congregation member can challenge his authority without risking their own standing in the church. How this becomes possible. The access a bishop has to every family in his district is the access of a man who is trusted absolutely. He does not knock and wait. He is welcomed. He sits with women whose husbands are in the field. He counsels couples whose marriages are in difficulty. He visits the sick, the grieving, and the spiritually struggling. In every one of those situations, he is alone with people who have been taught since childhood that his authority comes from God. That combination, total access, total trust, and no formal oversight above him, creates the specific vulnerability that cases of bishop misconduct across multiple states have documented in detail. Ohio Bishop Samuel Mullett Sr., convicted in 2013, exerted what prosecutors described as cult-like control over his community, including coercing married women into sexual relationships with him. His case is the most documented, but researchers and journalists who have covered the Amish community have identified patterns of misconduct in leadership that extend well beyond any single district. The pregnancy. Other secrets can survive inside a closed community indefinitely. A financial arrangement made in private, a disagreement managed through silence, a relationship that both parties deny and no witness can confirm. A pregnancy cannot be managed this way. A pregnancy has a timeline. It becomes visible. It requires explanation. And inside a community where every woman's life is known to every neighbor, where the absence of a pregnancy after marriage is noticed, where the presence of one is visible within months, a pregnancy that does not match the arithmetic of a marriage is one of the few facts that cannot be reframed, minimized, or quietly absorbed. When the woman's husband is not the father, and when the father is the bishop, the pregnancy becomes the fact around which every other fact must eventually arrange itself. There is no managing it. There is only the moment when it can no longer be concealed, and what happens after that moment arrives. How the community found out. It rarely arrives as a single dramatic revelation. In most cases documented in Amish communities, the truth surfaces the same way all truths surface in close communities, through accumulation. Someone notices something. Someone else confirms a detail. A conversation between two women at a quilting circle carries information that neither of them states directly, but both of them understand. A deacon hears something from a family member who cannot carry it alone anymore. The bishop's wife, if he has one, may be the last to know formally and the first to know in the way that wives know things that have not been said to them directly. By the time the matter reaches a formal acknowledgement, a meeting with the deacon, a conversation between the woman's husband and the church leadership, the information has already moved through the district in the way that significant information always moves. The formal acknowledgement does not reveal the truth to the community. It confirms what the community has already begun to understand. What happens to the woman? The woman's position in the aftermath is the most painful and the most poorly served by the community's existing structures. She is a member of a church whose highest authority has violated her trust, and in many documented cases, the nature of that violation sits somewhere in the difficult territory between coercion and consent. In a community where a woman's ability to refuse the most powerful man in her world is not straightforward, what the community asks of her depends on how the situation is framed. If the relationship is characterized as mutual, as an affair between two adults, she faces the same disciplinary process as any member who has violated the Ordnung through sexual misconduct. She may be required to confess before the congregation. Her husband must decide what the marriage becomes after this. Her position inside the community she has always lived in now depends on how the bishop's misconduct is characterized, and that characterization is made by the same institutional structure that the bishop himself was part of. The women who have spoken publicly from similar situations across various Amish communities describe a consistent experience being held to a standard of confession and repentance that their bishop was either not held to at all or held to much later and much more gently. The community's response. What an Amish community feels when its bishop falls is something that does not have a clean name. Shock is part of it, the specific shock of a betrayal by the person who was most trusted, which lands differently than betrayal by anyone else. Grief is part of it too, not just grief for the woman and her husband and the child coming, but grief for the institution itself, for the understanding of God's selection that the bishop's conduct has placed under a shadow. If God chose this man by lot, what does it mean that this man did this? That theological question does not get answered in a community meeting. It lives in people quietly for years. There is also, in many documented cases, a strong institutional instinct to protect the community's reputation before protecting the woman inside it. The Amish do not want the attention of English authorities. They do not want journalists. They want to handle what has happened inside the walls of the district through the church's own process with as little external visibility as possible. This instinct is not malicious. It is the same instinct that every closed institution has ever had when someone at the top has failed catastrophically. It is also, in many cases, the instinct that most damages the people who were harmed. How a bishop is removed. Removing a bishop from his position is one of the rarest events in Amish church life, and the process for doing it reflects how unusual it is. A bishop cannot be removed by his own congregation alone. The authority to remove him rests with the bishops of neighboring districts, men who hold the same position he holds, who come together to hear the matter and make a determination. In serious cases, the removal involves a formal council of bishops who review the evidence, hear from witnesses, and determine whether the man's conduct has disqualified him from the position God placed him in through the lot. If they determine that it has, he is removed from the bishopric and placed under the same church discipline that would apply to any baptized member who had committed the same offense. He is not simply demoted. He is treated as a fallen member who must confess and seek restoration through the same process available to anyone else. The district then goes without a bishop until the lot is drawn again, a period that can last months, and that leaves the community in a state of leadership uncertainty that is itself felt as a consequence of what he did. The child and what follows. The child born from this situation enters a community that knows, in its entirety, the circumstances of their conception. In a world with no social media and no public record of the kind the English world maintains, this knowledge lives in human memory alone. But human memory in a community this small and this long established is thorough and does not clear quickly. The child is not formally punished. The Ordnung does not provide for the sins of a parent to be visited on a child through church discipline. But children grow up inside the knowledge that adults carry about them, and that knowledge shapes how they are seen and how they come to see themselves. The bishop's other children, if he has them with his wife, carry a different version of the same weight. In communities where these situations have been documented, the children of the circumstances almost universally describe growing up inside an awareness they could not name but could not escape. What the community does with them in practical terms varies by district and by bishop. What it cannot do is unknow what it knows about how they came to be here. What this reveals about power with no oversight. The Amish system of church governance is designed around a principle that most people outside the community find admirable in theory, that authority should be local, personal, and accountable to the community it serves rather than to a distant institution that does not know its people. A bishop chosen by lot is accountable to God and to the district he shepherds. The system trusts that the combination of divine selection and community accountability will produce leaders worthy of the trust placed in them. What it does not build in is a formal mechanism for addressing situations where that trust is violated by the leader himself. When the person responsible for accountability inside the community is the person who has committed the offense requiring accountability, the system has no clean internal response. It must reach outside itself to neighboring bishops, to the broader church structure in a way it was not designed to do frequently and does not do gracefully. The cases of bishop misconduct that have resulted in criminal convictions across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Missouri over the past 2 decades share a common feature. The community's internal process was the first response, and in most cases it was not sufficient to address the harm that had been done. English law arrived not because the community invited it, but because the harm was serious enough that people inside the community eventually could not contain it. What the modern world built and why. When the Catholic Church abuse scandal broke publicly in the early 2000s, the American legal and institutional response was significant and specific. Mandatory reporting laws were strengthened. Independent review boards were established. Victims were given legal pathways to pursue accountability outside the institution that had failed them. HR departments and secular organizations were expanded precisely because history had demonstrated repeatedly that institutions without external accountability mechanisms protect themselves before they protect the people inside them. The Amish looked at none of that and built none of it, not from malice, but from a theological conviction that the community handles what belongs to the community. What the modern world understood, slowly and at enormous cost to victims across many institutions, is that this conviction, however genuinely held, is insufficient when the person who needs to be held accountable is the same person the accountability system was built around. The Amish are still learning that lesson. What the community rebuilds on. There is no clean ending to a story like this inside an Amish community. The bishop is removed, or he confesses and is placed under the ban, or in the most serious cases, he faces the attention of English authorities whose involvement the community did not seek and cannot fully control. The woman lives inside the community or outside it, depending on what her husband decides and what the church asks of her. The child grows up with the weight of knowledge that no child should carry, but that this child will carry anyway. Because knowledge inside a small community does not evaporate simply because no one speaks it aloud. What the community is left with is a question that no ordnung review and no bishop's council fully answers. If God chooses the bishop by lot, and the bishop does this, what does that mean about the lot? The Amish answer to this, developed over centuries of dealing with human failing inside a theological framework that does not accommodate it easily, is both simple and hard. The lot does not choose a perfect man. It chooses the man God wants in that role, who is still a man, still capable of the full range of human failure. The institution is not discredited by the failure of the person inside it. The community continues. A new lot is drawn. A new bishop is chosen. Whether the community can extend to its new bishop the same complete and unguarded trust it extended to the last one is the question that does not get answered in any meeting or any sermon. It gets answered slowly, across years, through the quiet work of people who were hurt by what trust cost them and who must decide, each of them privately, whether to offer it again. Most do. That is what the Amish are, a people who rebuild